Welcome to a Scotland Then episode. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about some of the stories that made the headlines back in December 1883. Well, firstly, because it was December and Christmas was looming, as it is now too, there were adverts in the Evening Gazette for best price sales on well-fed ducks, turkeys and geese, as well as Christmas fat stock sales, which was an annual sale of fat cattle, sheep and pig, so everyone was really getting into the Christmas spirit. As many of you may know by now, I'm from Oban, and when I was growing up there, the railway station was a huge, beautiful, distinct blue and white building with a lovely old clock tower. It's sadly long since been demolished, but it was really beautiful. Well, I found a wee snippet in the Evening Gazette on the 10th of December 1883 saying that the station buildings at Oban had a narrow escape of being blown up by gunpowder when 4 barrels of blasting gunpowder were left outside the gentleman's waiting room right under a gas lamp for almost 3 hours, unbeknownst to those using the waiting room. And the porters and fishermen who used the waiting room to get out of the cold and wet would light and smoke a pipe or cigarette there too. Eventually it was realised that the barrels contained gunpowder and they were removed, but a local contractor was taken into custody before being released without charge when he told the story of how a nearby quarry had run out of blasting material and the barrels were in transit to the quarry, having first somehow been placed in the gentleman's waiting room at the train station. A bit of an oversight there, but I'm certainly glad it didn't get blown up before I got to see it, although I'm sure a few changes had been made to it between 1880 when it opened to when I lived in Oban. Another story that caught my eye, as it was talked about over 5 full columns in the Weekly Scotsman on the 15th of December 1883, was a destructive gale that had caused wrecks, loss of life, and houses to be blown down, amongst other things. Nowadays, we all accept a bit of turbulent weather and storms. However, this gale, back in 1883, was described as being the most violent storm that has been experienced for many years, with winds at its height gusting at approximately 70 miles per hour or 112 kilometres per hour, and £50 per square feet. And to demonstrate just how bad that storm was, a storm 4 years prior measured at £30 per square feet of wind, and it was enough to cause the Tay Bridge disaster, resulting in the railway bridge collapsing completely and killing everyone on board, which to date still remains the second deadliest rail accident in Scottish history. But the December 1883 storm was almost double the strength again, with the destruction, whilst most severe on the west coast, also reached the east, including there being scarcely a house along the Ayrshire coast which had not suffered from the furious storm, tugs and vessels being forced ashore and smashing to pieces, with a young boy aboard and a captain of the tug being washed overboard and sadly dying. About 11 miles in from the Ayrshire coast, a building collapsed and an engineer inside was killed. Further north, about 10 miles west of Glasgow, a building's chimney collapsed and injured 6 people. Further west again, there was great destruction to shipping reported at Greenock and the death of a man. And in Glasgow itself, considerable damage was done to property, including the gable end of at least one house falling in through the house's roof and seriously injuring the 4 occupants. On the northeast coast of Scotland, the Moray Firth was reported to be running very high, and 2 ships were wrecked there, but thankfully the crew were all rescued. Further north at Fraserburgh, ships were reported to have gone ashore or required assistance to be able to safely get into port. The storm also caused great destruction to properties all over Scotland, with vast stretches of plantations on several estates having been levelled. There was also disruption with the telegraphic service throughout most of Scotland, with communication between Scotland and England being entirely interrupted for a day, due to wind at times blowing with hurricane force, and the telegraph wires being broken. The damage continued throughout Scotland, with it being reported that house roofs were stripped and chimney cans were broken, and tiles, slates and lead were strewn across streets, and houses and shop windows were blown in. Large trees in Balbirnie, Balgony and Balfour Woods were torn up by the roots, and roads were blocked from wind-tossed trees, and areas in Alloa were completely saturated and rivers flooded due to the rain falling in torrents. The extensive article goes on to mention in detail so many more areas and destruction that the storm seemed to have caused to every part of Scotland, including parts of the new double-track Tay Bridge that was under construction being blown down. Now, it's always nice to have a wee windfall now and again, but Mr. Campbell, who was employed in Bells Hill in Glasgow as a clothier, was shocked when he received a letter from a lawyer in Queensland, Australia. Mr. Campbell's brother had moved to Queensland 20 years prior in 1863 to start their new life, and the two brothers had eventually lost touch, with the pair not having had contact for many years, and so Mr. Campbell was sad when the letter he received from a Queensland lawyer told him that his brother was dead. However, the shock of hearing about his brother's death soon turned to surprise and then delight when he found out that his brother had done really well for himself over in Queensland and had left him his estate, which included 1,000 acres of land, 600 livestock and 80 horses, as well as the buildings on the land, which amounted to between £8,000 and £10,000, which in today's money would be about £822,000 to over £1 million and just over $1 million to over $1.25 million. I wonder what Mr. Campbell and his family did with the money, or maybe they even moved to Queensland to start a new life for themselves. What would you have done if you received that kind of windfall? A story that caught my eye in the Oban Times from the 15th of December 1883 was titled Ornaments from Melon Seeds. Melon seeds, to most, would either be used to produce more plants or just throw away. However, in Scotland in 1883, melon seeds were used to make imitation gold ornaments for ladies to wear. Ornaments such as necklaces, bracelets and earrings, although they were called eardrops back then. The concept originated in the Cape, where large quantities of knickknacks using melon seeds were manufactured. The melon seeds were first cleaned and any blemishes removed when they naturally displayed a golden hue, before being pierced at either end and then finished off by being dipped in saffron water, with the article saying that, by daylight the golden imitation ornaments look good, but by artificial light they look perfect. Would you be pleased if you'd been presented with a melon seed necklace to wear? The following stories all came from the front page of the Weekly Scotsman on the 15th of December 1883. There was a whole column dedicated to tragedies and fatal accidents that had taken place in the previous week, including a James Hall being shot in the face in Greenock when he playfully slapped a Henry Ramsay on the back as he was aiming his gun and about to fire. A number of men and lads had decided to spend their Saturday at a shooting gallery, no doubt having a few drinks and a good laugh. And it was as Henry was about to take his shot that James decided that that would be a good time to playfully slap him on the back. But Henry got a shock and instantly turned round, still with his gun aimed, and accidentally discharged his weapon into James's face, with a bullet entering one of his eyes and shattering it, as well as breaking the bridge of his nose. James was taken to hospital and underwent an operation the following day, but his shattered eye had to be removed. His friend, Henry, handed himself into the police station, but it doesn't say what the outcome for Henry was, but on this occasion it was an accident, and thankfully James survived. The next 4 stories were fatal accidents. One in Motherwell, involving a train, one near Blantyre, to do with working in the coal pits, and one near Straven and another near Jedburgh to do with a horse and wagon. We heard in a previous Scotland Then how train safety had not been the best back then, when a guard had jumped down to manually uncouple the trains while the train was still moving and he had fallen and the train had gone over his leg, with the leg being amputated. Well, this story is very similar, other than, in this case, 19-year-old Daniel, who was a brakesman and who resided in Motherwell, didn't survive. Daniel had jumped off a train to shift a railway point, again with the train still moving, and he had been standing close to the track, allowing the train to pass, when he fell forward onto the rails and the train passed over him. It was said that he would have been killed instantly. So working on the train seemed to have been a really deadly career back then. The next fatal accident happened at pit number 4 at Blantyre Collieries, when pony driver William Mackay, who was only 14.5 years old, had called at pit 4 to tell the men down the mine that it was coming up time. As he waited for the men, he kicked a few pieces of coal that were lying on the ground, before noticing a loose piece of coal protruding from the coal face, and so he pulled it loose, which was enough to dislodge 2 stones weighing 200 weight, which is about 102 kilograms, from the coal face. William was knocked to the ground and landed on a sharp piece of coal lying on the ground, possibly one he had been kicking absently, which penetrated his skull and killed him instantly. On the same day as this, about 11 miles south near Straven, 13-year-old Neil McNaught was driving his horse and cart, which was filled with limestone, to the nearest mine, when he lost his balance when trying to unfasten the horse's tail chain and fell across the rail. Now, I don't know much about horses and carts, but apparently this was not good at all, as this caused his right leg to almost be severed from his body, and his left ankle and foot were fractured. Neil had to have his right leg amputated, but sadly he died 2 hours later. The final fatal accident took place at Whitburn, about 24 miles north of Jedburgh, following a party of gentlemen having spent the day shooting in the moors. One of the gentlemen was 35-year-old George Johnston, and on the return journey he was seated in a horse-drawn carriage along with the Marquis of Lothian's gamekeeper, when, upon reaching a bridge over a burn, the horse got spooked and shied away, causing one of the coach's wheels to come into contact with a stone by the side of the road and destabilising the carriage, causing the 2 occupants to be violently thrown out. While the gamekeeper and coachman sustained only slight injuries, George sustained 2 broken legs and a fractured skull, and he slipped into unconsciousness, sadly never regaining consciousness and dying the following day. And now finally, something to lighten the mood. I found this poem in the Alloa Circular on the 12th of December, and it brought a knowing smile to my face. It's called The Old Man in the Wood. There was an old man who lived in a wood, as you may plainly see. He said he could do more work in a day than his wife could do in 3. If that be so, the good woman said, I hope you will allow that you should stay at home today, while I go follow the plough. But you must milk the bridled cow, for fear she should go dry, and you must feed the little pig that lives within the sty, and you must watch the speckled hen, lest she should lay astray, and you must wind the spool of yarn that I spun yesterday. The good woman took her stick in her hand and went to follow the plough. The old man took the pail on his arm and went to milk the cow. Wo-ho tidy, lo-ho tidy, my little cow, stand still. If I ever come to milk you again, it will be against my will. But Tidy hinched and Tidy flinched, and Tidy whisked her tail, and Tidy soon gave such a kick the milk flew out of the pail. He went to feed the little pig that lived within the sty. He hit his head against the beam and made the blood to fly. He went to watch the speckled hen, but she had laid astray, and he quite forgot the spool of yarn that his wife spun yesterday. So the old man at last was forced to confess, when his wife came home at even, that she could do more work in a day than he could do in 7. So that's just some newspaper stories from December 1883, but there were so many stories that I just couldn't tell you. If you're interested in finding out more about what happened in the past, the website I use for research is the British Newspaper Archive. And while I pay a subscription because I use it a lot, there are over 4 million free-to-view pages that cover not just Britain, but Ireland, the Caribbean, India, and more. If finding out more about the past interests you, then I have an affiliate link, which you can find in the show notes or at scottishmurders.com. I hope you enjoyed this week's Scotland Then from 1883. A new Scottish Murders episode will be released next week, and this time it won't be such an old case, but from 1966, with the unsolved murder of a well-known man about town in Edinburgh, with the murder weapon thought to have been a Ford Mustang emblem. So until next time, I've been your host, Dawn.
Scottish Murders is a production of Cluarantonn.